Sarah Martinez stood outside the military recruitment office, her nursing degree clutched tightly in her sweaty palm. The summer heat in San Antonio made her uniform stick uncomfortably to her skin, but the nervous energy coursing through her veins had nothing to do with the weather. At 23, she was about to make a decision that would change her life forever. The recruitment officer, Sergeant Williams, looked her up and down with barely concealed skepticism. Sarah was barely 5 feet 4 inches tall, with a slight frame that made her appear even younger than her years. Her dark hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and her brown eyes held a determination that the sergeant had seen in many recruits, though few of them looked quite as unlikely for military service as the young woman standing before him. "You sure about this, miss?" Sergeant Williams asked, leaning back in his chair. "The Navy's medical corps is demanding work. Not exactly what I'd call suitable for someone of your stature." Sarah felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment and anger. She had heard similar comments throughout her nursing school years. Classmates and even some professors had questioned whether she was tough enough for the demanding field of emergency medicine. But Sarah had graduated at the top of her class, earned her trauma certification, and worked nights in one of the busiest emergency departments in Texas. She had seen more blood, chaos, and life-or-death situations than most people twice her age. "I'm absolutely sure, Sergeant," Sarah replied, her voice steady despite the doubt gnawing at her confidence. "I want to serve my country, and I want to use my skills where they're needed most." The sergeant shrugged and pushed the paperwork across the desk. "Your choice. But don't say I didn't warn you." As Sarah filled out the forms, she thought about her grandmother, Maria, who had raised her after her parents died in a car accident when she was 12. Maria had been a nurse during the Korean War, serving in field hospitals under conditions that Sarah could barely imagine. Her grandmother had told her stories of saving lives under enemy fire, of working 18-hour shifts with minimal supplies, of earning the respect of soldiers who initially doubted her abilities because of her gender and small stature. Mija, her grandmother had said just weeks before her death, "Strength doesn't come from how big your muscles are. It comes from how big your heart is and how much you're willing to sacrifice for others." Those words echoed in Sarah's mind as she signed her name on the enlistment papers. She was determined to prove that she belonged, no matter what obstacles lay ahead. Basic training at Great Lakes Naval Station was every bit as brutal as Sarah had expected. From the first day, she was singled out by drill instructor Petty Officer Martinez, no relation, despite sharing the same last name. The instructor seemed to take particular pleasure in pushing Sarah beyond her limits, calling her tiny in front of the other recruits, and making her repeat exercises when others were allowed to rest. "Martinez," the DI would shout across the training ground. "Drop and give me 20. Let's see if you can handle what real sailors go through." The other recruits watched with a mixture of pity and relief that they weren't the target. Sarah gritted her teeth and did the push-ups, her arms shaking with exhaustion. She refused to show weakness, refused to give anyone the satisfaction of seeing her break. Her bunkmate, Jessica, a tall blonde from Minnesota who was training to be a sonar technician, tried to offer comfort one evening after a particularly grueling day. "Don't let him get to you," Jessica whispered as they lay in their narrow bunks. "He's just trying to weed out the weak ones. You'll show him." But as weeks passed, the pressure only increased. During combat training, Sarah struggled with the heavier weapons. Her smaller frame made it difficult to handle the equipment that her male counterparts managed with ease. During physical training tests, she barely made the minimum requirements, while others excelled. The whispers among her fellow recruits grew louder. "What's she even doing here?" She overheard one recruit saying to another. "She'll never make it in the real Navy. She's going to get someone killed." The comment hit Sarah like a physical blow. The fear that she might not be strong enough, that she might fail when someone's life depended on her, haunted her nights. She began waking up in cold sweats, dreaming of scenarios where her weakness led to tragedy. One evening, as Sarah sat alone in the mess hall, picking at her dinner, Petty Officer Martinez approached her table. The drill instructor's expression was unreadable as he sat down across from her. "You know why I've been riding you so hard, Martinez?" he asked, his voice quieter than she had ever heard it. Sarah looked up, surprised by the question. "Because you think I don't belong here, Petty Officer." Martinez leaned back, studying her face. "Wrong. I've been riding you hard because I see something in you that you don't see in yourself yet. You think this is about how much weight you can lift or how fast you can run?" Sarah remained silent, unsure where the conversation was heading. "This is about heart, Martinez. This is about whether you'll stand your ground when everything goes to hell. I've seen big, tough guys fold like paper when the pressure hits. But I've also seen people half your size carry wounded soldiers twice their weight to safety because they refuse to quit." The drill instructor stood up, preparing to leave. "The question isn't whether you're strong enough, Martinez. The question is whether you believe you are. Because if you don't believe it, no one else will either." That night, Sarah lay awake thinking about her grandmother's stories. Maria had told her about a night in Korea when their field hospital was overrun by enemy forces. The doctors had fled, but Maria and 2 other nurses stayed behind with the wounded who couldn't be moved. They worked by candlelight, removing shrapnel and stopping bleeding while gunfire echoed around them. When morning came, all their patients had survived. "We didn't stay because we weren't afraid," Maria had explained. "We stayed because someone had to. And when you have to, you find strength you never knew you had." Sarah made a decision that night. She would stop trying to prove herself to others and start believing in herself. The next morning, she approached her training with a different mindset. Instead of focusing on what she couldn't do, she concentrated on what she could do. Her shooting improved when she learned to compensate for the weapon's recoil. Her endurance increased when she found her own rhythm instead of trying to match longer-legged runners. Most importantly, during medical training simulations, Sarah began to shine. While other recruits struggled with the pressure of treating simulated battlefield injuries, Sarah remained calm and focused. Her nursing background gave her an advantage that no amount of physical strength could match. She could start in foreign conditions that left others fumbling, could assess and prioritize multiple casualties, and could work efficiently under pressure. Instructor Chief Petty Officer Rodriguez, who oversaw the medical training, began to take notice. During one particularly intense simulation involving multiple casualties and simulated combat conditions, Sarah managed to stabilize 3 critical patients while other recruits struggled with one. "Outstanding work, Martinez," Chief Rodriguez said after the exercise. "That's exactly the kind of thinking we need in our medical corps." For the first time since arriving at boot camp, Sarah felt a spark of confidence. Maybe she did belong here after all. As graduation approached, Sarah had earned the respect of her fellow recruits and instructors through her dedication and skill. She still wasn't the strongest or fastest, but she had proven herself where it mattered most. When assignments were handed out, Sarah was selected for advanced medical training with the goal of eventually serving with Special Operations Forces. The night before graduation, drill instructor Martinez pulled her aside one final time. "You did good, Martinez," he said with something that might have been pride in his voice. "You proved what I thought from day one. That size doesn't matter when you've got heart. But your real test is just beginning. The teams you're going to work with, they're going to doubt you just like everyone else has. The difference is, now you know who you are." Sarah nodded, thinking of her grandmother's words and her own journey over the past months. "I won't let them down, petty officer. And I won't let myself down either." "I believe that," Martinez replied. "Now go show the world what a real Navy corpsman looks like." The next morning, Sarah stood in formation with her fellow graduates, her dress blue uniform crisp and her medals gleaming in the morning sun. As they marched across the parade ground, she thought about the long road that had brought her to this moment. The doubts hadn't disappeared entirely, but they were quieter now, overshadowed by a growing confidence in her abilities and purpose. After the ceremony, as families gathered to celebrate with their new sailors, Sarah stood alone for a moment, missing her grandmother, who would have been so proud. But she wasn't truly alone. She carried Maria's strength with her, and she was ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. Her orders were clear: report to Naval Medical Center Portsmouth for advanced trauma training, followed by assignment to a Special Operations Medical Unit. It was exactly what she had hoped for, and exactly what terrified her most. But Sarah Martinez was no longer the uncertain young woman who had walked into that recruitment office. She was a Navy corpsman, and she was ready to serve. As she walked toward the bus that would take her to her next assignment, Sarah could hear her grandmother's voice one more time. "When you have to, you find strength you never knew you had." She was about to find out just how much strength she really possessed. The Naval Medical Center Portsmouth buzzed with activity as Sarah reported for her advanced trauma training. The facility was massive, handling everything from routine medical care to the most complex battlefield injuries. Sarah felt a familiar knot of nervousness in her stomach as she walked through the corridors lined with photos of medical personnel who had served in conflicts around the world. Her instructor, Commander Patricia Hayes, was a legend in Navy medical circles. A trauma surgeon who had served multiple deployments in Iraq and Afghanistan, Hayes had a reputation for being brilliant, demanding, and absolutely uncompromising when it came to standards. She was also known for her skepticism about young corpsmen who thought they were ready for special operations medicine. Martinez, Commander Hayes said, looking up from a clipboard as Sarah entered the training facility. I've read your file. Top of your class at basic, excellent performance in preliminary medical training. Impressive credentials for someone so young. Sarah stood at attention, unsure whether the commander's tone indicated approval or doubt. Thank you, ma'am. Hayes circled around her, much like a predator sizing up its prey. What I want to know is why a talented corpsman like yourself wants to throw away a promising career by trying to work with special operations. Do you have any idea what those teams expect from their medical personnel? I believe I do, ma'am. I've studied the requirements extensively, and I'm prepared for the challenges. You believe you do, Hayes repeated, her voice dripping with skepticism. Young corpsmen, believing and knowing are two very different things. Over the next 3 months, I'm going to show you exactly what special operations medicine entails. If you survive my training, we'll see if you're ready for the real thing. The training that followed was unlike anything Sarah had experienced. Where basic training had tested her physical limits, this program pushed her medical knowledge and skills to the breaking point. She learned to perform emergency surgery in simulated combat conditions, with explosions going off around her and instructors shouting contradictory orders designed to test her ability to maintain focus under extreme stress. On her first day in the trauma simulation lab, Sarah was paired with hospital corpsman First Class David Thompson, a veteran who had already completed 2 deployments with Marine units. Thompson was everything Sarah wasn't: tall, muscular, and supremely confident. He made no effort to hide his skepticism about her presence in the program. Great, Thompson muttered as they were assigned to work together. I get stuck with the rookie, who probably faints at the sight of blood. Sarah bit back her initial response, and instead focused on preparing their equipment for the simulation. They were told they would be treating multiple casualties in a simulated forward operating base under attack. The scenario was designed to test their ability to prioritize patients, work as a team, and maintain composure under extreme pressure. When the simulation began, chaos erupted around them. Smoke filled the room, sirens wailed, and instructors playing injured soldiers screamed for help. Sarah felt her heart rate spike, but her training kicked in. She quickly assessed the first casualty, a simulated chest wound that required immediate intervention to prevent the patient from bleeding out. While Thompson struggled to establish an airway on a second patient, Sarah had already started in 4, administered pain medication, and begun stabilizing her casualty's breathing. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency, guided by hours of study and her prior nursing experience. Thompson, Martinez, you've got incoming wounded. Commander Hayes shouted over the noise. 3 more casualties, 1 critical. Thompson looked overwhelmed, sweat pouring down his face as he tried to manage his current patient while preparing for the new arrivals. Sarah quickly finished securing her patient's airway and moved to help him. Focus on the chest wound, she told Thompson calmly. I'll handle the new casualties and come back to assist. Thompson shot her a grateful look and nodded. Sarah's calm demeanor in the chaos was exactly what he needed to regain his focus. The new casualties arrived, one with a simulated head injury, one with severe abdominal trauma, and one with what appeared to be a fractured spine. Sarah quickly triaged them, identifying the abdominal trauma as the most immediate threat to life. She worked with methodical precision, controlling bleeding while simultaneously coordinating with Thompson to ensure their other patients remained stable. When the simulation ended, Commander Hayes approached their station with an unreadable expression. Sarah braced herself for criticism, knowing that no matter how well she thought she had performed, there were always areas for improvement. Interesting performance, you two, Hayes said, looking between Sarah and Thompson. Thompson, you started strong but lost focus when the pressure increased. That hesitation could have cost lives in a real situation. Thompson nodded, his earlier confidence clearly shaken. Yes, ma'am. I'll work on maintaining composure under pressure. Hayes turned to Sarah. Martinez, your technical skills are solid, and you maintained focus throughout the scenario. However, you took charge of the situation without establishing clear communication protocols with your partner. In the field, unclear command structure can be just as dangerous as medical incompetence. Sarah absorbed the feedback, recognizing the validity of the criticism. Understood, ma'am. I'll work on improving team communication. See that you do. Tomorrow we'll be running a scenario based on an actual mission that went bad in Afghanistan. I want to see if you can maintain that composure when things get really ugly. That evening, Sarah found herself in the base library, studying mission reports and medical case studies from recent deployments. She was determined to understand not just the medical procedures, but the tactical environment in which special operations medics had to work. The stories she read were sobering. Accounts of medics working under direct fire, treating multiple casualties with limited supplies, making life-or-death decisions in split seconds. One report particularly caught her attention. It detailed a mission where a four-man Navy SEAL team had been ambushed during a reconnaissance operation. Their medic, Hospital Corpsman Second Class Michael Rivera, had been wounded in the initial attack, but continued to treat his teammates while under enemy fire for over 6 hours until extraction arrived. Rivera had saved 3 lives that night, including his own, despite suffering from a concussion and a fractured arm. Impressive reading material, a voice said behind her. Sarah turned to see Thompson approaching with his own stack of books and papers. I wanted to understand what we might be getting into, Sarah replied, making room for him at the study table. Thompson sat down with a heavy sigh. I owe you an apology for today. I went into that simulation thinking I knew what I was doing, and you ended up having to bail me out. That was embarrassing. Sarah studied his face, seeing genuine humility rather than the arrogance she had initially encountered. We both learned something. That's what training is for. Yeah, but you kept your cool while I was falling apart. Where did you learn to work under pressure like that? Sarah thought about her time in the emergency department, the countless nights dealing with trauma cases, domestic violence victims, and drug overdoses. I worked in an emergency department before enlisting. You see a lot of chaos in civilian trauma medicine, though nothing quite like today's simulation. Thompson nodded appreciatively. That makes sense. Most of us came straight from basic training without real-world medical experience. No wonder you seemed so calm. They spent the next few hours studying together, sharing insights, and discussing the cases they were reviewing. Sarah found that Thompson was actually quite knowledgeable about tactical medicine. His earlier performance had been more about nerves than incompetence. By the end of the evening, they had developed a mutual respect and the foundation of what would become a strong working relationship. The following weeks brought increasingly complex and challenging scenarios. Sarah and Thompson were tested in simulated helicopter crashes, underwater rescue operations, and urban combat situations. Each exercise pushed them to their limits, forcing them to adapt their medical knowledge to environments that no civilian hospital would ever encounter. During one particularly brutal week, they were put through a scenario based on a real mission where a special operations team had been trapped in a building for 18 hours while under siege. The team's medic had been forced to perform an emergency amputation with improvised tools to save a teammate's life. Sarah and Thompson found themselves in a similar situation, working with limited supplies while instructors created an atmosphere of extreme stress and time pressure. Sarah's hands shook as she prepared to make the simulated amputation on a realistic training mannequin. The scenario was designed to test not just their technical skills, but their psychological readiness to make difficult decisions under extreme circumstances. Talk me through your thought process, Martinez, Commander Hayes demanded, her voice cutting through the simulated gunfire and explosions around them. Patient has sustained massive trauma to the lower leg with compromised blood supply, Sarah responded, forcing her voice to remain steady. Tourniquet application has controlled immediate bleeding, but the limb is non-viable and poses a risk of systemic infection if not removed. Amputation is necessary to save the patient's life. Proceed, Hayes ordered. Sarah took a deep breath and began the procedure, her training taking over despite the chaos around her. She worked with methodical precision, explaining each step to Thompson, who was assisting, while simultaneously monitoring their patient's vital signs. The simulation was incredibly realistic, complete with artificial blood and anatomically correct responses to her interventions. When she finished, Sarah stepped back, her surgical gown covered in fake blood and her hands still trembling slightly from the adrenaline. The room fell silent as the exercise ended, and Commander Hayes approached to examine her work. "Acceptable technique," Hayes said after a long moment. "Clean cuts, proper attention to blood vessel control, adequate wound closure for field conditions. Time to completion was within acceptable parameters." Sarah felt a rush of relief, but Hayes wasn't finished. However, the commander continued, "Your emotional response needs work. In a real situation, that level of visible stress could undermine your team's confidence and compromise the mission. Special operations personnel depend on their medic to be the comm center in the storm. If they see you shaking, they'll start questioning whether you can handle the situation." The criticism stung because Sarah knew it was accurate. Despite her technical competence, she was still struggling with the psychological pressure of these extreme scenarios. That night, she called her grandmother's best friend, Elena, who had also served as a nurse during the Korean War. "Mija," Elena said after Sarah explained her struggles, "your grandmother faced the same challenges. When she first started treating wounded soldiers, she would throw up after every surgery. But she learned that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's doing what needs to be done despite the fear." "How did she get past it?" Sarah asked. "Practice and faith in herself. She practiced her medical procedures until they became second nature, so her hands could work even when her mind was overwhelmed. And she had faith that she was where she was supposed to be, doing what she was meant to do." Those words resonated with Sarah as she threw herself even more intensively into her training. She spent extra hours in the simulation lab, practicing procedures until she could perform them perfectly even while instructors shouted at her and created distractions. She studied tactical medicine textbooks until she could recite protocols from memory. Most importantly, she worked on developing the mental discipline to remain calm under extreme pressure. The transformation was gradual, but noticeable. By the end of her second month in the program, Sarah was performing at the top of her class. Her partnership with Thompson had evolved into a seamless working relationship where they could anticipate each other's actions and communicate effectively even in the most chaotic situations. Commander Hayes took notice of Sarah's improvement during a complex multi-casualty scenario that required treating 5 wounded personnel while under simulated enemy fire. Sarah moved between patients with calm efficiency, directing Thompson and 2 other corpsmen while simultaneously performing advanced medical procedures. "Outstanding performance, Martinez," Hayes said after the exercise. "You've shown significant improvement in stress management and team leadership. I'm recommending you for the final phase of training, field exercises with actual special operations units." Sarah felt a surge of pride and excitement, but also apprehension. The final phase would involve working with real Navy SEAL teams during training exercises, the last step before potential assignment to an operational unit. It was what she had been working toward, but it also represented the ultimate test of everything she had learned. "Thank you, ma'am," Sarah replied. "I won't let you down." "I don't think you will," Hayes said with what might have been a small smile. "You've come a long way from the uncertain young corpsman who walked into my program 3 months ago. Now let's see if you're ready for the real thing." The humid Virginia air felt thick as Sarah stepped off the transport vehicle at the Naval Special Warfare Training Facility. Around her, the sounds of intense training echoed across the compound. The sharp crack of rifle fire, the splash of bodies hitting water during surf training, and the rhythmic chants of instructors pushing their students to their limits. This was where Navy SEALs were forged, and Sarah was about to become part of that legendary brotherhood. Senior Chief Petty Officer Marcus Johnson was waiting for her at the medical facility. A 20-year veteran of special operations with multiple combat deployments, Johnson had the weathered look of someone who had seen more than his share of action. His evaluating gaze reminded Sarah of every instructor who had initially doubted her capabilities. "So you're the corpsman everyone's talking about," Johnson said, his voice neutral but his eyes sharp with assessment. Small package for such a big reputation. Sarah had learned not to take the bait with comments about her size. I'm ready to prove myself, Senior Chief. Johnson nodded approvingly. Good answer. You'll be working with Team 7 for the next month. They're preparing for deployment, and they need to know their medic can handle whatever gets thrown at her. These aren't training mannequins, Martinez. These are real operators who depend on their medic to bring them home alive. He led her to a briefing room where 4 men in desert camouflage uniforms sat around a metal table. Their conversation stopped as Sarah entered, and she felt the familiar weight of skeptical stares. Gentlemen, Johnson announced, meet your new corpsman. Hospital Corpsman Second Class, Sarah Martinez. The team leader, Lieutenant Commander Jake Stevens, stood first. He was tall and lean with the kind of quiet confidence that came from years of leading men in dangerous situations. His handshake was firm but not crushing, and his eyes held a calculating intelligence. Stevens, he said simply. Team leader. The others introduced themselves in turn. Petty Officer First Class Tony Rodriguez was the team's communications specialist, a compact man with quick movements and an easy smile. Chief Petty Officer Mike Sullivan handled explosives and breaching operations. His massive frame and scarred hands told the story of someone who worked with dangerous tools. The youngest member was Petty Officer Second Class Kevin Park, a sniper whose quiet demeanor masked an intensity that Sarah found slightly unsettling. So, Doc, Rodriguez said, using the traditional nickname for their medic, what's your story? You look like you should be working in a hospital, not humping a ruck through the desert. Sarah had prepared for this question, knowing it would come. I joined to serve where I'm needed most. I've got the training and the skills. Now I need to prove I can do the job in the field. Sullivan leaned back in his chair, his massive arms crossed. Training is one thing. Combat is something else entirely. You ever been shot at, Doc? No, Sarah admitted. But I've treated gunshot victims in civilian emergency rooms. I know how to work under pressure. Park spoke for the first time, his voice quiet but carrying across the room. Emergency room pressure and combat pressure are different animals. In the ER, the only person trying to kill you is time. Out there, people are actively trying to put bullets in you while you're trying to save lives. The room fell silent for a moment, and Sarah felt the weight of their skepticism. These men had been through hell together, had saved each other's lives multiple times, and trusted each other completely. She was the unknown variable, the potential weak link that could get them all killed. Lieutenant Commander Stevens broke the silence. Here's how this is going to work. Document. We've got 4 weeks of training exercises leading up to our deployment. You'll be with us for every minute of it. We'll test your medical skills, your tactical knowledge, and your ability to function as part of this team. If you can't hack it, you'll be reassigned before we deploy. No shame in that. Not everyone is cut out for this kind of work. Understood, sir, Sarah replied. What do you need me to do? First thing is to learn how we operate. We're not like regular Navy units. We move fast, we work in small groups, and we depend on each other for everything. Our medic isn't just someone who treats wounds. You're a full member of the team. You'll carry a weapon, you'll help with tactical planning, and when things go sideways, you'll need to be able to fight as well as heal. The next morning, Sarah reported for her first training exercise with Team 7. They were running a simulated hostage rescue operation, and her job was to provide medical support while also serving as part of the assault team. She had trained with weapons during her earlier instruction, but never in this kind of integrated combat role. The exercise began before dawn. Sarah found herself crouched behind cover with Rodriguez and Park, waiting for the signal to move. Her medical pack was secured to her back, but she also carried an M4 rifle and enough ammunition to sustain a firefight. The weight felt strange but manageable, and she tried to focus on the task ahead. Remember, Doc, Rodriguez whispered. When we go in, stay behind me and Park. Your job is to get to any wounded and keep them alive until we can extract. But if someone shoots at you, shoot back. Dead medics don't save anyone. The signal came, and they moved. Sarah followed Rodriguez through a maze of shipping containers that served as the mock terrorist compound. The sound of blank ammunition filled the air as they engaged simulated enemies, and Sarah fought to maintain her composure as chaos erupted around her. Casualty, Stevens shouted from across the compound. Doc, we need you. Sarah sprinted toward the sound of his voice, keeping low and moving from cover to cover as instructors playing enemy fighters directed fire in her direction. She found Sullivan on the ground, clutching his leg and groaning in simulated pain. Red paint marked his uniform to indicate the location and severity of his wound. GSW to the femur, Sullivan gasped, staying in character. I think it hit the artery. Sarah immediately began her assessment, her training taking over despite the continued sounds of combat around her. She applied a tourniquet to control the simulated bleeding while simultaneously checking Sullivan's vitals and preparing to move him to a more secure location. Stevens, she called out. I need cover to evacuate this casualty. Negative, Doc, came the reply. We're still taking fire from the second building. You'll have to stabilize him where you are. Sarah gritted her teeth and continued working. In a real situation, moving Sullivan would be extremely dangerous, but leaving him exposed while she worked would be equally risky. She had to find a way to provide adequate medical care while minimizing their exposure to enemy fire. Working as quickly as possible, she established in 4-line and administered simulated pain medication. The exercise rules required her to perform each procedure as if it were real, complete with proper sterile technique and documentation, all while lying flat behind minimal cover with blank ammunition crackling overhead. How long until you can move him? Park asked, sliding into position beside her with his sniper rifle ready. 2 more minutes to get him stabilized, Sarah replied, not looking up from her work. Then, we'll need a stretcher or I'll have to drag him. No stretcher available. Can you carry him? Sarah looked at Sullivan's bulk and knew there was no way she could carry him alone. But she also knew that admitting weakness wasn't an option. I'll manage, she said, hoping she sounded more confident than she felt. When she finished stabilizing the wound, Sarah grabbed Sullivan under his arms and began dragging him toward better cover. The big man cooperated as much as possible, but even with his help, moving him was exhausting work. Her smaller frame worked against her as she struggled to generate enough leverage to move his weight. Come on, Doc, Sullivan muttered, staying in character as a wounded operator. Get me out of here. Sarah redoubled her efforts, her muscles straining as she pulled Sullivan across the rough ground. Rodriguez appeared beside her and grabbed Sullivan's legs without a word, and together they managed to get him to safety behind a concrete barrier. Nice work, Doc, Rodriguez said quietly. But, next time, ask for help sooner. We're a team. The exercise continued for another hour, with Sarah treating 2 more simulated casualties while the team cleared the remaining buildings. By the time it ended, she was exhausted but felt like she had performed adequately. Her medical procedures had been flawless, and she had managed to function effectively despite the chaos around her. During the debrief, the team's performance was analyzed in detail. Lieutenant Commander Stevens was thorough in his critique, pointing out tactical errors and missed opportunities for better coordination. When he got to Sarah's performance, his assessment was mixed. Medical procedures were excellent, he said. Quick assessment, proper treatment protocols, good situational awareness. However, you hesitated to ask for help when you needed it, and your physical limitations could have compromised the mission in a real situation. Sarah felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment, but she forced herself to listen to the criticism objectively. That said, Stevens continued, you maintained composure under fire and showed good tactical awareness. With more training, you could develop into an effective team member. Over the following days, the exercises became progressively more challenging. Sarah trained with the team on urban warfare, desert operations, maritime insertions, and mountain warfare. Each environment presented unique challenges for providing medical care, from treating hypothermia at high altitude to dealing with decompression sickness during underwater operations. The team's initial skepticism began to fade as Sarah proved herself repeatedly. During a particularly challenging mountain exercise, Parks suffered a rayal injury when he fell during a night climb. Sarah's quick response and expert treatment of his dislocated shoulder earned his grudging respect. Not bad, Doc, he said as she immobilized his arm. You've got steady hands. Rodriguez had already accepted her as part of the team, often seeking her out for conversations during downtime. Sullivan was slower to warm up, but gradually began including her in the team's informal gatherings and inside jokes. The real test came during the final week of training. The team was tasked with a complex mission that combined elements of everything they had practiced. They would conduct a night insertion via helicopter, move several kilometers cross-country to a target compound, conduct a raid to capture a high-value target, and then extract under fire while protecting both their prisoner and any casualties. The mission began at midnight with a helicopter flight over the dark Virginia countryside. Sarah sat in the aircraft's cargo bay, checking and rechecking her medical supplies while trying to calm the butterflies in her stomach. This was the closest thing to a real mission she had experienced, and she knew the team was watching to see how she handled the pressure. The insertion went smoothly, with the team fast roping from the helicopter into a small clearing surrounded by dense forest. Sarah hit the ground running, quickly moving to her assigned position in the patrol formation. They had 3 kilometers to cover before reaching the target, and they needed to arrive undetected. Moving through the forest at night with full combat gear was exhausting work. Sarah struggled to keep up with the team's pace, her shorter stride forcing her to take more steps to cover the same ground. But she gritted her teeth and pushed forward, determined not to slow down the mission. They reached the target compound just before dawn. According to the scenario, intelligence indicated that a high-value terrorist leader was meeting with his lieutenants inside the main building. The team's job was to capture him alive while eliminating his security detail. As they moved into position for the assault, Sarah felt her heart rate increase. This was it, the moment when months of training would be put to the test. She checked her medical supplies one final time and chambered a round in her rifle. "Remember, Doc," Stevens whispered over the radio, "your primary job is medical support, but you're also responsible for securing the prisoner once we have him. Stay alert and be ready for anything." The assault began with Sullivan breaching the main door using explosive charges. The team flowed into the building like water, each member moving to their assigned position with practiced precision. Sarah followed close behind, ready to provide medical support if anyone was wounded. The exercise was incredibly realistic, with role players acting as both terrorists and innocent civilians. Blank ammunition filled the air as the team engaged multiple targets while trying to locate their objective. Sarah found herself in a corridor with Rodriguez when they encountered a wounded enemy fighter. "Doc, check him out," Rodriguez ordered while keeping his weapon trained on the prone figure. Sarah approached carefully, knowing that even in training, situational awareness was critical. The role player was simulating serious abdominal injuries, and, according to the exercise rules, she was required to provide medical treatment even to enemy personnel once they were no longer a threat. Working quickly, she assessed the wounds and began emergency treatment. The scenario was designed to test her ability to make difficult moral and tactical decisions under pressure. Did she spend valuable time saving an enemy fighter, or did she prioritize mission completion? "How long?" Rodriguez asked, scanning for other threats. 5 minutes to stabilize. Then, he needs immediate evacuation or he'll die, Sarah replied, staying in character. "Negative on the evac. We've got the HVT, and we're moving out. Make the call, document." Sarah felt the weight of the decision. In a real situation, she would be bound by medical ethics to provide care regardless of the patient's status. But she also had a responsibility to her team and the mission. She made her choice. "I can't leave him to die," she said firmly. "Give me 2 minutes to get him stable enough to survive until someone else can treat him." Rodriguez nodded approvingly. "Your call, document. I'll cover you." Sarah worked with desperate efficiency, providing just enough medical care to ensure the enemy would survive without compromising the mission. It was a difficult balance, but she managed to find a solution that satisfied both her medical ethics and her tactical responsibilities. The team extracted successfully, completing the mission without casualties. During the debrief, Sarah's decision to treat the enemy fighter was specifically discussed. "Tough call, Doc," Stevens said. "You made the right choice from a medical ethics standpoint, but you also found a way to balance that against mission requirements. That's the kind of thinking we need in the field." As the training period drew to a close, Sarah realized that she had earned something more valuable than the team's acceptance. She had earned their trust. They had seen her perform under pressure, make difficult decisions, and prove that she belonged with them. On their final night together before deployment, The team gathered in Rodriguez's room for an informal celebration. For the first time, Sarah felt like a full member of Team 7 rather than an outsider trying to prove herself. "You know, Doc," Sullivan said, raising a can of soda and a mock toast. "When you first showed up, I figured you'd last about a week before requesting a transfer to a nice, safe hospital ship." "What changed your mind?" Sarah asked. "You proved you've got what it counts," Park said quietly. "Heart. Technical skills are important, but heart is what matters when everything goes to hell." Stevens raised his own drink. "To our document, small package, big heart." The others echoed the toast, and Sarah felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the beverage. She had found her place, earned her spot on one of the military's most elite teams. Tomorrow they would deploy to Afghanistan, where her skills would be tested in the ultimate arena. But tonight, she was exactly where she belonged. The Afghan sun was merciless as it beat down on Forward Operating Base Chapman, where Team 7 had been stationed for 3 months. Sarah had grown accustomed to the constant heat, the ever-present dust that found its way into everything, and the tension that came from knowing they were deep in hostile territory. What she hadn't grown accustomed to was the way some of the other personnel on the base still looked at her with barely concealed skepticism. "There goes the SEAL team's mascot," she overheard a Marine sergeant saying to his buddy as she walked past the chow hall. "I still can't believe they let someone that small operate with special ops." Sarah kept walking, her jaw clenched but her expression neutral. After 3 months and dozen successful missions, she still had to prove herself to people who judged her solely on her appearance. But Team 7 had long since stopped questioning her abilities. She had saved Park's life during their second week in country when he caught shrapnel from an improvised explosive device, and she had kept Sullivan functional when he contracted a severe case of dysentery that would have sent most operators home. Lieutenant Commander Stevens found her in the medical bay, reviewing intelligence reports for their next mission. "Doc, we've got movement orders. High-priority target in the Kunar province. Intel says it's a Taliban commander who's been coordinating attacks on supply convoys." Sarah looked up from the reports she had been studying. "What's the timeline?" "We insert tomorrow night. It's going to be a long-range patrol, 3 days in hostile territory with no backup. The target is holed up in a compound about 40 kilometers from the nearest friendly forces." "Medical considerations?" Sarah asked, already mentally reviewing her supplies and planning for the extended mission. "Standard loadout, but plan for extended operations. No resupply, no medevac unless it's absolutely critical. We go in, get the target, and get out." That evening, Sarah meticulously checked and rechecked her medical supplies. 3 days in enemy territory meant she had to be prepared for anything: combat injuries, illness, environmental hazards, and the psychological stress of extended operations. She packed extra antibiotics, additional pain medication, and specialized equipment for treating traumatic injuries under field conditions. Rodriguez found her still working when the rest of the team was already asleep. "You're going to wear yourself out before we even leave, document." "Just making sure everything's perfect," Sarah replied, not looking up from her inventory checklist. "Once we're out there, there's no room for mistakes. You've done this before. We trust you." Sarah paused in her work and looked at him. Over the months, Rodriguez had become something like a big brother to her, always quick with a joke to lighten the mood, but fiercely protective when others questioned her presence on the team. "I know," she said, "but I also know that every mission could be the one where everything goes wrong. I've seen what happens when medics aren't prepared." Rodriguez sat down beside her. "You remember that Marine sergeant who was talking trash about you today?" Sarah nodded, surprised that he had noticed. "His squad got hit by an IED last month. Their corpsman wasn't prepared for multiple casualties, and they lost 2 guys who should have survived. You know what the difference was?" "What?" "The difference was that their medic was overconfident and underprepared. You're the opposite. You prepare for everything and never assume you know enough. That's why we sleep better knowing you're watching our backs." The next morning, Team 7 loaded into a Marine Corps helicopter for the flight to their insertion point. Sarah sat quietly, mentally reviewing her medical protocols while watching the Afghan landscape roll by beneath them. The mountains were stark and beautiful in their own way, but she had learned to see potential landing zones, defensive positions, and evacuation routes rather than scenic vistas. The insertion went smoothly, with the team fast roping into a valley about 10 kilometers from their target. They immediately moved to a predetermined rally point where they would spend the day hidden before moving to conduct surveillance of the target compound. The patrol to the objective took all night, with the team moving carefully through terrain that was perfect for ambushes. Sarah found herself constantly scanning for threats while also monitoring her teammates for signs of fatigue, dehydration, or injury. Park was favoring his left ankle slightly, a chronic issue from an old parachuting accident, and Sullivan was showing early signs of heat exhaustion despite the cooler nighttime temperatures. They reached the surveillance position just before dawn and immediately began observing the target compound. The intelligence had been accurate. The Taliban commander was indeed present, along with what appeared to be a significant security force. Stevens called in their observations while the team settled in for a long day of watching and waiting. "Doc," Stevens whispered, crawling over to where Sarah was positioned. "We've got a problem. Higher headquarters wants us to wait another 24 hours before conducting the raid. There's supposedly a high-value meeting happening tomorrow night that they want us to observe." Sarah processed the implications immediately. Another day in their current position meant increased risk of detection, additional strain on their water and food supplies, and more time for things to go wrong. It also meant that Park's ankle and Sullivan's heat-related issues would have more time to worsen. "Medical status of the team?" Stevens asked. Sarah quickly assessed each team member. Park's ankle is manageable, but getting worse. Sullivan needs to increase his fluid intake and electrolyte replacement. Rodriguez and I are good to go. Overall, we can handle another day, but I wouldn't want to push it beyond that. Copy that. Monitor the team, and let me know if anyone's condition deteriorates. The second day passed slowly, with the team taking turns observing the compound while the others rested in whatever shade they could find. Sarah spent her time discreetly monitoring her teammates and treating minor issues before they became major problems. She gave Park a mild anti-inflammatory for his ankle and made sure Sullivan was drinking enough water and taking salt tablets. As evening approached, their patience was rewarded. A convoy of vehicles arrived at the compound, bringing several individuals that intelligence would later identify as senior Taliban leaders. The meeting that headquarters had wanted them to observe was indeed taking place. "Looks like Christmas came early," Rodriguez muttered as they watched the new arrivals. "That's half the Taliban leadership in this province." Stevens was already on the radio, reporting the intelligence windfall to higher headquarters. When he finished, his expression was grim. "Change of plans," he announced quietly. "Higher wants us to wait until the meeting breaks up, and then hit the compound when security is reduced. Problem is, that might not be until tomorrow morning." Sarah felt a knot form in her stomach. Another 12 to 18 hours in their exposed position would push the team beyond safe operating limits. Park's ankle was getting worse, and Sullivan was starting to show signs of more serious heat-related problems despite her interventions. "Sir," she said carefully, "I need to update you on the team's medical status." Stevens crawled over to her position, and Sarah gave him a detailed assessment of each team member's condition. She was particularly concerned about Sullivan, who was showing early signs of heat stroke despite the preventive measures she had implemented. "How long do we have before someone becomes non-operational?" Stevens asked. "Park can probably function for another day, though his effectiveness will be reduced. Sullivan is my bigger concern. If we don't get him to a cooler environment soon, he could become seriously ill." Stevens was quiet for a long moment, weighing operational requirements against the welfare of his team. "Can you keep Sullivan functional until tomorrow morning?" "Yes, but it's going to require aggressive treatment that might compromise his ability to perform during the assault." Before Stevens could respond, Rodriguez's urgent whisper cut through their conversation. "Boss, we've got movement. Patrol heading our way." Sarah grabbed her rifle and crawled to the edge of their concealed position. In the distance, she could see a group of armed men moving along a trail that would bring them dangerously close to Team 7's location. The team had two choices: try to remain hidden and hope the patrol passed by, or engage the patrol and risk exposing their presence to the much larger force at the compound. "Everyone stay put," Stevens ordered quietly. "Let them pass." The patrol consisted of 6 men armed with AK-47 rifles and what appeared to be a rocket-propelled grenade launcher. They were moving casually, talking among themselves, and not paying particular attention to their surroundings. Sarah held her breath as they passed within 50 meters of the team's position. Just as it seemed they would pass by safely, one of the patrol members stopped and pointed directly at their hiding spot. Sarah couldn't understand what he was saying, but his tone and body language made it clear that he had spotted something suspicious. "Compromise," Stevens whispered into his radio. "Prepare to engage." The next few seconds passed in slow motion. The Afghan fighter raised his rifle toward their position while shouting to his companions. Stevens made the decision that would save their lives, but complicate their mission immensely. "Take them," he ordered. The firefight was brief, but intense. Team 7's superior training and positioning gave them a decisive advantage, and all 6 enemy fighters were eliminated within 30 seconds. But the damage was done. Their presence was now known, and it would only be a matter of time before the compound's security force came looking for the missing patrol. "Doc, check for wounded," Stevens ordered while scanning for additional threats. Sarah quickly moved between her teammates, conducting rapid assessments to ensure no one had been hit during the firefight. Everyone was uninjured, but their tactical situation had deteriorated dramatically. "How long before they missed this patrol?" Park asked, already scanning the area through his sniper scope. "Not long," Stevens replied. "We need to move to an alternate position and reassess." But before they could begin moving, Rodriguez spotted another problem. Multiple vehicles leaving the compound. "Looks like they're organizing a search." Sarah watched as trucks filled with armed men began fanning out from the compound, moving in a pattern that would systematically search the surrounding area. Team 7 was now hunted prey in hostile territory, with no immediate support available. "What are our options?" Sullivan asked, sweat pouring down his face despite the cooling evening air. Stevens studied his map while considering their tactical situation. "We can try to evade and extract, or we can complete the mission while they're dispersed looking for us." "Sir," Sarah interjected, "I need to update you on Sullivan's condition. He's showing signs of moderate heat exhaustion. If we're going to conduct an assault, it needs to be soon before he becomes combat ineffective." Stevens looked at his team, for exhausted operators against an unknown number of enemy fighters, with one team member's effectiveness declining by the hour. A conventional commander might have ordered immediate extraction, but Stevens was not conventional. "We complete the mission," he decided. "Doc, what do you need to keep Sullivan functional?" Sarah quickly assessed her options. "I can give him 4 fluids and electrolytes to stabilize him short-term, but it's a temporary fix. We'll have maybe 2 hours before the treatment starts to wear off." "Do it." Working as quickly and quietly as possible, Sarah established an 4-line in Sullivan's arm and administered a carefully calculated mixture of fluids and medications. The treatment would indeed stabilize him temporarily, but it was essentially borrowing against his future reserves. As she worked, the sounds of the enemy search parties grew closer. Their original surveillance position was no longer tenable, and they needed to move to avoid being discovered. "Ready to move," Sarah reported, finishing her treatment of Sullivan. The team began a careful withdrawal to an alternate position that would allow them to observe the compound while remaining hidden from the search parties. The movement was slow and deliberate, with frequent stops to avoid detection. They reached their new position just as the sun set completely, providing them with the cover of darkness for their assault. The compound was less heavily guarded than before, with many of the security personnel deployed in search teams looking for Team 7. "This is our window," Stevens announced. "Doc, final medical check." Sarah quickly assessed each team member one more time. Park's ankle was swollen, but manageable. Sullivan was temporarily stabilized, but operating on borrowed time. Rodriguez was tired, but fully functional. She was exhausted, but ready. "We're good to go," she reported. The assault began with Park providing overwatch from a distant position while the rest of the team moved toward the compound. Sarah followed Stevens, Rodriguez, and Sullivan as they approached the main building where intelligence indicated the high-value targets were located. The firefight that followed was unlike anything from their training exercises. Real bullets cracked overhead as they moved through the compound, and the stakes were life and death rather than points in an exercise. Sarah found herself treating a wounded enemy fighter while simultaneously providing covering fire for Rodriguez as he cleared a building. "Doc, Sullivan's down," Stevens shouted from across the courtyard. Sarah's heart stopped as she saw the big operator lying motionless near the compound's main entrance. She sprinted across open ground under fire, her medical training overriding every tactical consideration. Sullivan was conscious, but bleeding heavily from a gunshot wound to his upper chest. Sarah quickly assessed the injury. The bullet had penetrated his body armor at an angle, creating a serious, but potentially survivable wound if treated properly. "How bad?" Sullivan asked, his voice strained but clear. "Bad enough," Sarah replied, working frantically to control the bleeding. "But you're going to live if you do exactly what I tell you." Working under fire, Sarah managed to stabilize Sullivan's condition enough to move him. But as she prepared to drag him to safety, she realized their extraction route was cut off by enemy fighters who had responded to the sound of gunfire. "Stevens," she called out, "I need immediate support for casualty evacuation." "Negative, Doc. We're pinned down." Sarah looked around desperately for options. Sullivan was too heavy for her to move alone, and their position was becoming increasingly dangerous as enemy fighters closed in. She made a decision that would have seemed impossible months earlier. Grabbing Sullivan's rifle, she laid down suppressive fire while simultaneously treating his wound. For several terrifying minutes, she alternated between shooting and providing medical care, using every skill she had learned in training. "Doc," Sullivan gasped, "you need to leave me and get out of here." "Not happening," Sarah replied firmly, reloading his rifle. "We all go home together or nobody goes home." The standoff continued until Park's precise sniper fire eliminated the enemy fighters who had them pinned down. Finally, able to move, Sarah managed to drag Sullivan to a more secure position where she could provide better medical care. Working in the darkness with limited supplies, she performed what was essentially field surgery to repair Sullivan's damaged blood vessels and lung tissue. Her hands moved with practiced precision despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. "Outstanding work, Doc," Stevens said as he secured the area around her position. "How long until he can move?" "He can move now if he has to, but he needs real medical attention within the next few hours," Sarah replied, finishing her field dressing of Sullivan's wound. The extraction that followed was a nightmare of moving through hostile territory with a wounded team member. Sarah stayed close to Sullivan, monitoring his condition while the team fought running battles with enemy fighters who had been alerted to their presence. By dawn, they had reached their extraction point, but their helicopter was delayed by enemy fire in the area. Sullivan's condition was deteriorating despite Sarah's continuous efforts, and she knew he needed immediate surgery. "Doc," Sullivan whispered, "I want you to know, you proved yourself tonight. Best corpsman I've ever worked with." "Save your strength," Sarah replied, but she felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the rising sun. When the helicopter finally arrived, it came under immediate fire from enemy positions in the surrounding hills. The pilot was forced to conduct a hot extraction under fire, and as they lifted off, Sarah realized they weren't out of danger yet. "RPG," Rodriguez shouted, pointing at a rocket-propelled grenade streaking toward their aircraft. The pilot took evasive action, and the grenade passed close enough that Sarah could feel the heat from its exhaust. But they were climbing now, gaining altitude and speed that would take them out of range of ground-based weapons. As the helicopter banked toward the safety of their forward operating base, Sarah continued working on Sullivan, monitoring his vital signs and adjusting his 4 medications. She had kept him alive through the longest night of her career, and she wasn't going to lose him now. "Doc," Stevens said over the helicopter's intercom, "I'm recommending you for a Bronze Star with V device for valor. What you did tonight, that was above and beyond." Sarah looked around at her teammates, Rodriguez grinning despite their harrowing night, Park methodically cleaning his rifle, and Sullivan giving her a weak thumbs up from his stretcher. These men had accepted her not because of her medical skills, but because she had proven she would never leave them behind. "I just did my job," she replied. "No," Stevens said firmly. "You did your job, and ours too. Sullivan's alive because you fought for him. We all made it home because you refused to give up." As the helicopter touched down at their base, medical personnel rushed to take Sullivan to the field hospital. Sarah watched as they wheeled him away, confident that he would make a full recovery. Standing on the helicopter landing pad in the early morning light, covered in dust and dried blood, Sarah thought about how far she had come from that uncertain young woman who had walked into the recruitment office. The doubters and critics were still there. She could see some of them watching from a distance, probably wondering how someone so small had made it back from such a dangerous mission. But their opinions no longer mattered. Team 7 had accepted her completely, and she had proven to herself that she belonged among the most elite warriors in the world. She was exactly where she was meant to be, doing exactly what she was meant to do. Later that afternoon, as Sarah sat in the medical bay completing her after-action report, Rodriguez appeared with a cup of coffee and a wide grin. "So, Doc," he said, settling into a chair beside her. "Ready for the next mission?" Sarah looked up from her paperwork and smiled. "Bring it on." 3 months later, Sarah would find herself hanging from a rope beneath an Apache helicopter as it evacuated her and a wounded Afghan child from a village under siege. The image would make international news, showing the small Navy corpsman who had once been ridiculed, proving that heroism comes in all sizes. But that morning, sitting in the medical bay with her teammates, Sarah Martinez had already accomplished something more important than fame or recognition. She had found her place in the world, earned the respect of the finest warriors she had ever known, and proven that courage isn't measured in pounds or inches. She was exactly who she was meant to be.